women who have a much higher intake of plants and fibre in their diet tend to have lesser menopause symptoms. Really important for metabolic health because they help to regulate the absorption of things like sugars in the diet, to regulate appetite. And listen, I work for a commercial company that is selling products, but we don't profit from confusing people.
In terms of how long the study has been going on, eating whole foods, cooking them together and sharing them with people who we quite like, the results are pretty conclusive.
Supplements are often really concentrated forms of nutrients that we would never typically get at that dose. They all interact with our bodies and with each other. It's hard to fathom that it would be allowed by our government to sell products aimed at babies that isn't actually helping them. Like the life stages where nutrition has the most long-term impacts is definitely...
Federica, hi, welcome to the show.
Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm so looking forward to speaking to you today. So I want to start off by going in a bit of a broad overview of nutrition and digestion. As we age, how does our bodies change? How do we process food differently? And is it different for men and women as well? Is that something that there's a difference in? What are your views on it?
So it's, first of all, it's just this idea that actually our bodies do change. So it's understanding that we don't react or respond to food. We don't absorb food in the same way. We don't use it in the same way as we age. And actually, I think that can be quite a powerful place to start because that often we beat ourselves up a bit if, we're not able to eat the same way that we used to in our 20s and feel the same way. Like, how is this failing me? But actually, it's just the privilege of aging is that your body does change. And so the main ways this happens is that we become a little bit less efficient at absorbing nutrients, at distributing them into the tissues they're needed. And ultimately, our tissues become a little bit less efficient at things like building new muscle, repairing damage. And this happens slowly over time and at different rates for different people. But as a general rule of thumb, after the age of 65, you start to think more about how you can optimize the diet to make sure it's really nutrient dense and how you can help advise people to make sure that they eat nutrient dense foods at every meal, how they can, include very specific combinations of foods that help with absorption. And we have to also start thinking about how foods interact with drugs and how that could impair absorption as we get older. So 65 is the sort of threshold when you start to really double down on that. But of course, our digestion, our absorption, it starts to change sort of 30s, 40s onwards is when you start to see these changes. So it's worth thinking about it before you hit 65. And you pointed out the sort of men and women, there is a difference. So the Zoe study on menopause really showed that women's metabolism just fundamentally changes at menopause. So that includes how we absorb food, how we utilize it. In our study, we looked specifically at sort of glucose levels after a meal and fat levels after a meal. But they are both markers of how our metabolism is working. And our metabolism is also involved in how we absorb proteins and vitamins and minerals. So it does change quite drastically for women after the menopause. And this is also in part mediated by changes in the gut microbiome. So the gut microbiome is this ecosystem of microbes that live in our gut. And they are also involved in and implicated in how we absorb, break down, use the food that we eat. So it's like a fairly complex picture, but the advice is fairly consistent in that if you're able to really increase your nutrient dense foods and you're able to pay attention to every meal as an opportunity to get these essential nutrients that we need, then actually you'll be putting yourself in a good position and helping your body do its job better.
I love how you describe aging as like the privilege of aging, because I think that narrative is somewhat distorted at the moment because we're kind of focusing on that longevity, and then there's that huge aesthetic push to not look like you're aging and then not change your lifestyle and be able to do the same things that you want. But actually it's such a privilege to be able to think of adapting to these new stages of life and how our bodies do change. And it's quite interesting the focus around the menopause, because obviously when you say, women or like people you age 35, 40, you immediately think, okay, we're kind of getting into the like perimenopause, menopause era of a lot of women's lives when they would begin to have some symptoms. And the metabolism is quite an interesting one, because I think a lot of people would say that one of the symptoms that they would feel is that they just can't lose weight as easily. They're sticking with this. They could be eating the same thing and they just cannot lose the weight. And of course there's lifestyle factors that do impact, but in terms of how our bodies break down the same foods that we've been eating maybe for the last 20 years, talk to me about that. How does the menopause actually impact that?
Well, so estrogen is obviously a major change. So estrogen levels really drop drastically at the menopause, and estrogen is involved in a lot. So we have estrogen receptors from like our scalp to our toe. That's why it's interesting working with women in menopause and doing the menopause research. Some of the symptoms are dry ears and things that you just think, oh gosh,
the glamour.
There's all sorts, and I think it's important to, when talking about menopause, I think it's really important to note that every woman is very different. And you see this across how we experience our periods. You see this across how we experience our pregnancies, breastfeeding, postnatal periods. Like, these are all reflections of how different we are in how we respond to the hormones that we create and have. So that's important to note. So some women will be like, well, I'm actually fine. I had no issue maintaining my weight throughout menopause. And other women will think, actually, my weight started really changing in my late 20s. It really varies. But what we found in our study was that postmenopausal women, regardless of age, so this is a really critical piece. It's like, it's not age-related change. It's really to do with primarily this change in estrogen, circulating estrogen, dramatically impacts how we're able to deal with fats and sugars after a meal. So you see that like blood sugar stays elevated for longer, blood fat stay elevated for longer, and inflammatory proteins are higher in postmenopausal women compared to premenopausal women of the same age. And so, like, why and how? There's lots of mechanisms. So it includes like how efficient our liver and our pancreas are to reacting and releasing insulin, and then how sensitive we are to that insulin. So insulin sensitivity, which is really important for being able to take these nutrients up into your tissues from your blood. And it's sugar, it's fat, but it's also proteins. So like insulin is this really important key that opens mechanisms to transport these nutrients. That's impacted by menopausal status. So estrogen, again, playing a role there. And it's how the estrogen interacts with the receptors. It's so much going on. But also, the really exciting piece that we found was, again, this mediation from the gut microbiome. So we have gut microbes that are directly impacted by estrogen levels, and their role is to create an enzyme, or one of the roles, is not the only one, but this enzyme that essentially cleaves estrogen back off receptors and circulates it again, so that you can either reactivate it and it's used by tissues, or it gets excreted in your poo. That's where unwanted hormones go. And when you don't have these microbes, this system doesn't work so well anymore. And so some people call these groups of microbes the estrobolome, and they've been given this name because they're so sensitive to estrogen. And we think that we're actually doing some science on this now, but the changes in the microbiome composition around this time are also a really strong mediator for the women who see more sort of negative effects on their metabolism and how we react to food, and those that actually don't have as much of a negative experience with it. And so what's interesting there is, well, this change in the microbiome and its role could also help to explain in part why women who have a much higher intake of plants and fiber in their diet tend to have lesser menopause symptoms. So we think not only is fiber and plants really important for metabolic health, because they help to regulate the absorption of things like sugars in the diet, they help to regulate appetite, they help with satiety signaling, but also we think this influence on the gut microbiome is actually playing a role. So it's quite a complex picture. I can't point to one mechanism, but there are several mechanisms involved in how menopause influences our metabolic health.
It's such a tricky one because it is so nuanced and it's so different for everybody, and they experience it. Even the stage and the age that people experience it is so different. Never mind the symptoms, never mind how long it takes and lasts and everything like that. It is so different for everybody. But it is interesting hearing kind of the almost like broad rules, the broad points of what you can do, because as you say, and a huge amount of, you know, the research that you do at Zoe points to the gut microbiome, and it is all based around that. It's what makes it all go round, and it's so fascinating how it changes minute on minute, day on day, and reacts so quickly. I mean, if anyone's had any sort of food poisoning or anything like that, you'll know how quickly it can react and just completely just say no, we're not having that, and how it can really, you know, in so many different ways manifest itself. So then you said, you know, maybe age 65 you should zoom in, well, not that you should, but it's a really good idea to zoom in on what you're eating, your diet. But then of course I'm guessing that the earlier you do this, it's sort of like that mobility movement. The more stretching you do in your younger years, perhaps the less seized up your body's going to be in later years. But it's never too late to start. It's always that lovely line which we all feel a lot more relieved when we hear. It's never too late to start, it's just good if you start earlier. But in terms of broad rules for approaching diet, are there any things that we can actually go through, or does it really matter when we're in our 20s and 30s, or can we get away with so much more? What sort of things are we looking at in terms of prioritizing points? Because it's such a maze of nutritional advice that is so overwhelming at times that there's actually only a few points we can actually apply in a consistent way. So what would be your points that you want to emphasize?
I love this question because I think so. It goes back to this idea that the science is complex, but the advice is simple. So just because the science is complicated, so we can get stuck in the weeds about mechanisms and pathways, and I love doing that, don't get me wrong. But even with the most like complex science, the advice is the same. And so anyone who tries to make you think that the advice is not, that the advice is complicated or that the advice doesn't agree, doesn't understand nutrition science. And I really mean that. I think it's quite harsh, but I think often there's this real confusion online, right? The more time goes on, the worse it gets. So there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of confusion, and it's getting harder and harder to disentangle credible experts from not credible experts. Really hard, to the point where, you know, even people who work at Zoe who are not scientists will be like, is this person like, oh, is this right? Because it's so confusing.
Convincing as well, a lot of the
100%.
time.
Oh,
You
lots of
see the little clickbait things, and that's what sticks with you because it's done in an aesthetic clickbaity way that just sticks in.
and there's lots of confidence in the delivery.
Mhm.
Like, and I think so. What I would say to that is that you know, if anyone makes you feel like they can't distill the advice to something simple, then they probably can't understand the complexity of the science, or they're thriving, their business is thriving from the confusion. Because unfortunately, you've got to be a bit skeptical, right? and say like, well, how is this going to benefit me, or is it benefiting them? And listen, I work for a commercial company that is selling products, so I'm not saying that I'm like the sanctimonious person, but what I really strongly believe, and what we definitely don't do, we don't profit from confusing people. We actually, most of what we do at Zoe, a huge part of the business is delivering free information through podcast, social media, press, articles, like free to access newsletters, all this stuff. That is a huge part of what we do, as part of our mission, right? And we also have commercial products. You can buy things from us, but it's really important, I think, if you're an evidence-based scientist or someone who works in nutrition in public health, you should not be profiting from confusion, because if you're creating the confusion, that's not helping public health. So it's just remember that it's like the science can be complex. We can go right into the detail of how different amino acids influence metabolic pathways and increase or decrease the likelihood of adiposity, right? Love it. Great area of research, really cool. what's the advice? Try to get a lot of your protein from plant-based sources, which eat more beans, eat more whole grains, eat more nuts and seeds. Like, it's boring, maybe, but it truly is the advice that helps to cover off the majority of the complex science. So I have tried to distill this into 5 food groups. There are 5 food groups that are missing from most of our plates. And they are the 5 food groups that when you look at chronic disease, because I think we also need to understand, like, what's your goal when we talk about changing your diet in your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. Everyone has different goals. So like in your 20s, it might be massively like optimizing your sports performance because you're in a sports team, or that can be any decade, but let's just take an example, right? 30s, it might be that actually you're planning to have a family and you want to optimize your fertility. And then your 40s, you might need like really optimize your immune system function, your energy, because you're traveling loads for work. There's different goals across the life course for different people. So understanding that nutrition plays a pivotal role at every life stage. I mean, the life stage where nutrition has the most long-term impacts is definitely in the womb. First 1,000 days of life, from conception to second birthday, your exposures to nutrition in that time have very long-lasting impacts. So especially when we think about severe undernutrition or overnutrition. Now we see that pregnant mothers who consume, for example, a really high amount of sugar-sweetened beverages in pregnancy, the children of those mothers are much more likely to develop metabolic disease later in life. So there are lasting impacts. But at every decade, and this is exactly what my book is about, at every decade, there is a different outcomes and impacts, but the advice is fairly simple. So again, like I want to demystify this idea that no one can agree on which diet. No, bollocks. We all agree. Like anyone who's worked in the space and reads the research can see that essentially a Mediterranean diet, which is gut centric, so high in fiber, high in bioactive compounds like polyphenols, also with fermented foods such as cheeses and yogurts, right, delivers the best outcomes across health outcomes in dozens and dozens and hundreds of trials with millions of people. So it's kind of like, so the trials, I should specify, dozens of trials and dozens of cohort studies, so looking at millions of people across both types of study. And it's not a mystery. We know the dietary pattern, which is made up mostly of plants, includes a lot of whole foods, is really the crux of it, Emily. I think we've moved quite far from having the majority of our diet come from whole foods now, especially in the UK and the US. So when you think about it, it's like, okay, let's go back to whole foods and then let's talk about the categories of whole foods. And as I said earlier, like the 5 food groups that are missing from most of our plates are beans, legumes, lentils, chickpeas, green peas, these guys, whole grains. So whole grains, when I say that, I don't necessarily mean buying the whole grain bread. I mean literally eating buckwheat and quinoa and spelt and barley, things that now can be quite hard to find in supermarkets, by the way, because people
You're
don't.
going to go to all of these little boutique shops that sell them, and it can be hard to find them, and you think that, but actually something that looks like a grain is a grain.
Yeah, and I mean oats, luckily,
Mm-hmm.
still easy to find. I mean, so spelt's having a comeback, and quinoa definitely had a glow up. So there's some of that on the market. But for
I love
example,
the glue up quinoa.
yeah, it definitely did, right? And then oats are interesting because it's actually quite hard to find steel cut oats. So like the whole oat, you kind of get the rolled oats much more easily than steel cut. So that just goes to show is like the demand drives what we get sold. So I would love for people to like go out and be like, I'm going to go and find me a whole grain and buy it, because then the supermarket's like, oh, people are buying whole grain, we should get some. So there's
So
the nuts and
what's the
seeds.
difference between the rolled oats then and the cut oats?
So the whole oat really looks like a seed, and the steel cut oats is the seed, but just chopped up a little bit, which makes cooking easier. The rolled oats are that seed that's been chopped up, or sometimes actually the whole seed, that's been steamed under high pressure and then rolled out. And what happens is that when you do that, first of all, you're changing the structure because you're steaming it. So you're already changing that. And then by rolling it out into like the familiar rolled oat flakes, you are removing quite a lot of the husk, so the external fiber comes with the seed. And then that lovely fiber that's removed is then sold back to you as oat bran supplement, which is cool. So you can do that if you want, or sold to for farming as well. So like cattle fed oat bran too. So there's whole grains, there's legumes, and I think I really encourage people to get into legumes. Just go for it. Find delicious recipes. Just get stuck in. Try it. If hummus is the way in for you, like make hummus with lots of different types of legumes, or perhaps you're someone who just loves green peas and you just expand for green peas to edamame beans and just go for it every day. Nuts and seeds. So most of us actually don't eat nuts and seeds daily, which is a real shame because they're a nutritional powerhouse. They had a lot of bad PR because of their fat content and calorie content in the 80s. And we now know that actually, because whole nuts have such a strong food matrix, like they're hard, right? You don't absorb a hell of a lot of the fats or of the energy from them, and the fats are the healthy kind, so we're not worried actually. So nuts and seeds, put them on everything. Shout out to chia seeds for just when you soak them and make a chia pudding. It's like transformational for your gut. They loves it. Microbiome loves it.
Why? What is it? Because I use the chia seeds and then I look at them and I go, "You guys are so small. What are you doing?
So
What's I know they're so
well, they
small."
have an amazing amount of fiber for a tiny seed, and when you soak them, that gelatinous that's fibers, that's soluble fibers that have just like expanded, and it just your gut loves it, and it helps you to be more regular, going to the loo. They also have a high amount of omega-3 ALAs, so a form of omega-3 that you find in plants, and they're actually high in protein. So like of the healthy plant protein. So it's like, oh, just great. Just go for this
win,
chip.
win, win.
Give them a soak, add them to your porridge, add them to whatever you like. And then the fourth group is fresh fruit. So fruit has, again, been demonized. It's got sugar in it. You shouldn't have it. It's like genuinely fresh whole fruit is going to save your life, especially when it comes to heart health. It massively decreases the risk of heart disease. Though, I think, again, the food industry's had a part to play here because when the portion of fruit and veg advice came out, or was reinforced rather, a lot of companies made fruit juices and then called them a portion of fruit. And it's not, okay? So fresh whole fruit, I really mean a whole fruit. Now, no shade on juices occasionally, especially if you're squeezing your own orange juice. Like, I don't want people to be scared of that. But eating the whole fruit delivers way more in terms of benefits than the fruit juice alone. So it's worth making sure that you have fresh fruit. Now, fresh fruit can also be frozen berries. So if you find that fresh fruit is actually quite hard to keep, or perhaps it's expensive, especially berries, frozen berries are great. Crack on, like go for it. So fresh whole fruit needs to come back on the menu. And the fifth group that's quite neglected and we're low in our diets is omega-3 rich foods. So I did mention chia have ALAs, so does walnuts, but actually the omega-3s found in fish are the sort of EPA type, which is what we need more of. And so for that, you kind of like embrace oily fish. So that doesn't have to mean salmon 2 or 3 times a week. It can be sprats, it can be anchovies, it can be sardines, tinned mackerel. There are so many great oily fish. And tinned fish, especially if you're not a lover of cooking fish and the smell of cooking fish, great. Tinned mackerel is an unsung hero of sandwiches and patés. Just, you can put it anywhere. It's delicious. Those 5 food groups are lacking on most of our plates. That does not mean that it replaces the fact that you should still eat vegetables, but it's just that actually most of us eat some form of vegetable every day, but a huge proportion of us are not getting the whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, omega-3s and fresh fruit. So that's why I like to call those my new 5 a day and really just trying to focus on getting those in daily, even if it's at first it might just be a spoonful of each, right? But then you can work your way up to having them regularly in your meals, and it will transform your diet. They're also happily very environmentally friendly as foods, with the exception of the omega-3 fatty acid containing fish. So you have to pay a bit of attention to where you're getting them from. But, they feature in the diet 2 to 3 times a week. So it's just about trying to invest in slightly more sustainable options, which is why I also say it doesn't have to be salmon. It can be the smaller fish. And shellfish, if you like them, have good amounts of omega-3s. So those are like, of course, they're part of the Mediterranean dietary pyramid. So having a look at that and what it constitutes is a good idea too. But it's just embracing the foods that we're lacking. So like one of the big drivers behind the work I do and behind Zoe's mission is helping people to reintroduce the foods. What are you missing from your plate? Forget what you need to cut out. Okay. We've had restrictive food advice floating around as diet culture for a very long time. It doesn't really work. So let's focus on what you need to add back in to your diet that's going to actually deliver health benefits. And, with nutrition in general, if you're eating X, it tends to replace Y. So there's only so much space on our plates and in our shopping baskets. And as soon as we start focusing on things we need to add more of, things that aren't serving us so well do tend to drop off.
Yeah, it is so true. And you alluded to that marketing mist that we're just kind of bombarded by, really. It's really hard to know who, what, why, where, when should we be eating. And often it's nice if it's in a lovely package because we feel like we're healthy, because we're buying into that, because X celebrity is endorsing this and they look like this. And there's that basic psychology, we'll be able to unpack that very quickly. But in terms of just what you were saying there, if it looks like an apple, eat it. It doesn't need to be a pressed juice. It can just be, hey, this is an actual fish, that has seen the water. It's not all this packaged, expensive, whatever it is. But then I do think, there's a huge discussion about supplementation. And obviously, at Zoe, that is part of one of the products that you offer, which you did discuss as well. So where do supplements fit? Where is their spot in approaching health? Because it can often feel like you don't want to make the lifestyle changes in your diet and let go of the things, but you will actually spend money in buying extra things that make you feel healthy. It's that sort of, you feel like you're doing something because they're on your shelf and you have, a whole jar of chia seeds and it looks like you have the little label on it and whatever you want to do, whatever floats your boat. But what are your views on supplements? Do you take supplements personally yourself? Where do they fit into a healthy lifestyle?
Such a good, so it depends, as usual, right? So it's like there are some life stages, pregnancy most notably, where supplementation is absolutely recommended and will decrease risk. So folates or folic acid supplementation in pregnancy, especially in the first 12 weeks, will decrease the risk of your child having spina bifida or other neurological conditions. So really worth doing. Very evidence-based. If you're somebody who follows a vegan diet, there is good evidence to suggest that actually supplementing with vitamin B12 could be really helpful. So there's specific use cases, right? Where it's like we can have a general rule for quite a large amount of people. But then everything else needs to be very personalized. So paying really close attention to what are we supplementing for? Like what's missing? Why is it missing? So that if you're someone who, for example, starts to supplement with iron because your iron levels are low, okay, great, definitely supplement with iron because you will feel rubbish if not, and it's not good for you. But why is your iron low? Like what's actually happening to cause that? Let's fix that. So it's the problem with supplement culture at the moment. There's a few issues with it. First of all, a lot of people aren't well informed on how to buy supplements that are well formulated, rigorously tested, right? And so you kind of shopping for things, and because they're not regulated like pharmaceutical drugs, it does feel a bit like you're just shopping for something fairly innocuous. It's like, I'll buy some face cream, I'll buy some supplements, right? But actually supplements are often really concentrated forms of nutrients that we would never typically get at that dose in food or through other exposures, right? Vitamin D is like a nice example because vitamin D, our skin's amazing at making it for us. And our vitamin D levels are sort of, related to how much sun exposure we get and how well our skin then turns into vitamin D. Some supplements have extremely high levels of vitamin D, which we would never get through food. And it's a different mechanism when you ingest vitamin D to when you make it in your skin. So it travels differently. And you can get some really high dose supplements for it. But vitamin D, like other vitamins, and they all interact with our bodies and with each other. So I think what's often not spoken about is polypharmacy, which is a big problem in the UK, actually. So like drugs that interact with each other, and then the side effects of those drugs cause another prescription that then interacts and causes another side effect. So polypharmacy tends to be a problem later in life or with complex disease. But now we're entering this new phase, and I was trying to think of a name for this because I do feel like I'm slightly beating the drum by myself, of polyxenobiotics. Okay, so what does that mean? So we've got polypharmacy, lots of drugs, and actually people take a lot of drugs for a long time, like PPIs. So like if you suffer with acid reflux or indigestion, you might be taking PPIs for years, and they're not really supposed to be taken for years. It's a side note. You might be taking statins, you might be taking blood pressure lowering medication, you might be taking HRT, lots of different drugs. And, all of these will hopefully have very good reason for prescription, but they're sometimes not revised together. So you get prescription at different points in time, and sometimes the whole packet isn't reviewed to see if there's something that needs to be removed. Then you're adding supplements to that, which again, concentrated forms of chemicals that interact. And supplements themselves interact with each other and compete for absorption, which is important. So if you're, for example, trying to take iron to help include your iron levels, there are certain micronutrients that will compete for absorption with iron. If you're taking them together, you will not get the benefit of taking them. So there's competition there. And then the supplements compete with the drugs. So they interact. Okay. Then to add to that, the last layer is the variety of exposures we have from our environment, whether it's pollution, plastics, forever chemicals, or additives in food. Now, these are known as xenobiotics because they are chemicals and structures that we didn't evolve with. So they're fairly recent in our history, so it lasts 100 years or so. And again, our body, sometimes they're not absorbed into the blood, but they will interact with the other chemicals we've ingested or inhaled, and our gut microbiome interacts with everything. So, for a very long time, things like aspartame were thought to be innocuous because they didn't really enter your blood so much. So we're like, oh, it's fine, it's just going out. It's just going through the gut and going out. And now, of course, we know that, no, the gut microbiome is interacting with this stuff. So I think that with supplements, there's an issue of taking them too lightly, of thinking that they're going to fix things when actually they're really there to support for a short period in most cases until we find the reason why there's this gap. But I'm also acutely aware of the fact that most people's diets at the moment are not nutritious. So increasingly, supplements are playing a part of plugging a gap that isn't being closed. And it's a real problem because, to your point, the way they're marketed is often plays into that narrative. So one of my favorite myths is this idea that actually eating fruits and vegetables is pointless now because they're so nutrient lacking that you might as well just not. So take my multivitamin. It's no, that's not how it works actually. So sure, nutrient levels have changed over time, and depending on how your carrot has been grown does change its vitamin content, but not to the extent that eating the carrot is pointless. You should still eat the carrot, whatever you can afford. So there's this real tension right now of and listen, we have, as to your point, we have a supplement. I designed it. It's designed to plug some of this public health gap that I told you about with the 5 groups that are missing on our food, fiber, that's what it's there for. Notably, it's made with food because that's the best way to get it. But what's interesting is when you look at our randomized controlled trial for our supplement, It did everything we wanted it to, which is brilliant. It really helps. People's gut microbiome changed. They were more satiated. Tick, tick, tick. It did what we wanted it to do. It tastes great, delicious. But when you compare it to a randomized controlled trial of dietary change, where you actually overhaul your diet, and in that trial, of course, we use Zoe as the medium to change your diet, the results from that are more impressive. Like, you're going to do a hell of a lot more good changing your diet and maintaining that than you are taking even a well-formulated, randomized controlled trial tested supplement, right? So I think we need to just reframe this idea that if, diet is the thing that can really overhaul your health, supplements can help to be small stepping stones compared to what is essentially like an actual mountain hike that the diet can provide. So it's not to say that you can use them wisely. Do I take them? So I'll give you, like, I take them if I need them. So for example, if I've had like really jet lagged, right, for traveling to the States, maybe the West Coast, then I will take a supplement that can just help me to like give my body a little bit of help with just the amount of inflammation that I'm going to put it through. So there are, and the way I choose supplements is looking at how they're made, what's the logic, what's the formulation. Please, I mean, if they have a randomized controlled trial in humans to show that it actually does the thing we want it to do, that's the gold standard. That's what we should be doing with our supplements, but a handful of companies do that. And then third-party testing. So if you're taking something that's like a creatine or like a very widely available compound, then third-party testing just gives you that reassurance that they've actually used the compound they're putting on the label. So third-party testing can be very useful for those kinds of supplements. But honestly, like, I think I really hope people start to think of supplements as something that's really quite powerful. And so it shouldn't be powerful in their chemical interaction. And we need to start thinking about holistically. More is not more, basically. And you can actually do your liver quite a lot of damage. Your poor liver has to deal with all this stuff. So many supplements have like 2000% of the recommended daily amount of the thing, of the individual nutrient. And if you're someone who's taking like 4 different supplements, so I have patients who take like a supplement in the morning, and then they'll take like a sleep supplement, and then they'll also take like an extra one. And sometimes they'll end up taking 5,000% of the RDA of individual nutrients. And there is such a thing as toxicity from these. Like, you don't want to make yourself really ill and put extra strain in your liver. So really, we need to, like, the supplements conversation. And then you touched on something super important, Emily, I'm sorry, but like the way that things are marketed and advertised is problematic, right? So there is regulation for what you can claim for a supplement, and there is regulation for what you can claim on a food product that has fortification from a specific nutrient. But the way that these guidelines work is, if I made a supplement, there's a lovely spreadsheet that you can access on the government website that gives you all the health claims that are approved for specific nutrients. So I can go to a lab and say, listen, I'm going to bring out my everything supplement tomorrow. And what I need it to go, I need to make a claim for all of these things. So that company can go away and be like, hey, great, we're going to put this like 54 strong list of different nutrients in. They're all synthetically derived nutrients. They're, will make it taste like orange. And you can make all the claims because it's above the threshold for all the claims. So I've made this supplement. I've packaged it up. I've called it the Everything Supplement. And I can sell it with the health claims on the front of pack and in my marketing, relevant to the spreadsheet, without ever testing if it does the thing in a human. So sure, the spreadsheet says that above this level, calcium is associated with improved gut health, right? But if my supplement has 54 ingredients in it, all of which are interacting with each other and competing for absorption, is the calcium claim going to have any measurable impact on my gut health and then copper for energy, and then vitamin C for like immune support. That's not how food works. It's not how nutrition works. So the key to why a diet is the answer to improving nutritional status and not supplements is because you have to consider the synergy of the entire diet. And with supplements at the moment, that is not considered. You make individual claims for individual things. And to top it off, you can't make any claims related to any trial you actually do on your product. So if you run a human randomized control trial on 300 people, as we did, and we found that our product improved XYZ, we can't use that because it's not on the health claims. Our nutrient values from whole foods don't reach the threshold to make the claim, even if our humans found it in a trial. So you see, it's like, it is backwards. And at some point, it can't continue. I think, and I'm not blaming, by the way, like the food standards, they're not doing a bad job. It's just that the market and the environment has evolved so quickly, and there are so many products available now. And we know, we've done research that shows how front of pack labels changes shopping behavior. If someone sees high in protein on the front of pack of a cereal, they'll buy that and pay more for it than the exact same cereal without that claim. So we have created an environment where food companies are a business and they want to make more money for their shareholders. And they have found that front of pack claims help with spending power. People buy things. So your lentils that have no claims on front of pack, that are actually a source of iron, they're high in fiber, they contribute to a healthy gut, all these things. They can't make any of those claims on the front of pack. And they're cheap, but you're not buying them. But instead, you might be buying like a highly processed, high-risk processed food that has added calcium in it, so it can make a gut health claim on front of pack. So it's not great. And you're paying more for that product, by the way. And that's delivering none of the nutritional benefits, right? Than your lentils. So I think it's time, like, hopefully people are starting to, or will start to stop referring to front of pack marketing to make your choices and start to think about how we can pivot back towards whole foods. And then when it comes to processed foods and supplements, like, is it the best option? How can I tell? Who made it? Why? And I mean, we've created a tool for the processed foods to help people unpack which processed foods are highest risk and which are actually okay. Because also, we're getting to this point where people have so much food anxiety that they do sort of get paralysis in the bread aisle. Like, is this bread all going to kill me because it's a supermarket bread? Well, no, some of them are better than others. So we've got a hard job actually, sort of at the moment, and consumers have a really hard job deciphering a lot of this information. But honestly, like, I hope people can return to a lot of it is ancient wisdom, like food wisdom of how to like make things from scratch, use seasonal produce. A lot of it is that. Science is now just backing up what we kind of knew about all those things, but also like being aware the food industry is a profit-making industry, like oil, right? And they're not here as a public health entity. They're not here. That's not their job, to help improve our health. Their job is to make more money. We do need some companies to care a bit more about public health. And I think some of them do. Some of them are trying to like improve their products. But we need to give people the independent advice to say, okay, ignore the front of pack marketing. Here's how you understand like how to build a healthy plate. Don't worry about misinformation. You're getting enough protein if you eat enough food, like all these things. So I guess at Zoe, we're trying to plug some of that. We're trying to give some of that information out for free, build tools that help people make decisions and choices, not based on marketing claims on front of pack. But it's quite a big job, and there's a big shift happening around it at the moment, I think.
When you were speaking just there, I went through fairly different stages of mild panic at the confusion of how complicated it is to then realizing just how simple it is. And I think the point of saying these food companies are businesses. So I've done a lot of work in the wedding industry, and the minute you say wedding, suddenly things go up by a few zeros. And it's something I don't feel comfortable with. I don't think it's right, but it's the way it is. And it's one of these things that we all sort of know. And then, you know, when you watch quite, you know, consume so much content and actually quite few bits of it actually stick in your brain. But I remember seeing this reel of this girl, and she had a photo of herself, and she was active and fit and went to the gym and whatever. And she said, this is what I looked like when I was on this diet. And it was all the high protein, like pancakes, cereal, blah, 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 all of the things that you can buy in the supermarket that make you feel like you are getting your protein in.
Yeah.
And then she said, and now this is what I look like, and all I've done is changed my diet. And it basically, she was eating the whole foods. And of course, we're going to take this with a dollop of salt because you don't actually know what was going on.
No.
But it does make sense, because it is that, does it actually look like food? You know, do you actually start with a raw ingredient? Like, do you own a vegetable peeler? Or we probably shouldn't be peeling the skin off our vegetables, but, you know, do you own the tools to actually cook with, that you're not just buying it all prepackaged? And sometimes I think that can be the simple part of it. And it just sort of blew my mind when you discussed how the supplements actually work, often maybe against each other. Because if you are on, you know, antibiotics and then you're taking a lot of paracetamol, like obviously that's quite an extreme example, because we know that they can have like drastic side effects. But you'd be thinking, oh, I wonder how this is going to work together. But actually, if you're piling in the supplements, you probably wouldn't even think that. And also the length of time, you don't want to be on, you know, antibiotics for more than basically as short a time as you want to, as you can be on. But then adding lots of other things, which you may not actually know the credentials of who made them and why. It is quite a frightening realization that I actually haven't really heard a huge amount of discussion about, of how long are you taking it for? It's not that, hey, I'm really healthy because I've been on iron supplements for years. Different if you're, you know, actually prescribed them. But in terms of if you're just feeling like I'm going to be healthy and tick that healthy box, then that's a really different discussion.
Yeah. And plenty of, you know, people say, oh, my doctor won't prescribe me supplements. So yeah, because the evidence isn't there. Like, they're not just being mean. They're not trying to deprive you of something that works. So I think, you know, it's a really difficult thing, and people aren't talking about it enough. Now, my first degree was I did an honours in pharmacology, so that's why I've got a specific interest in. I have always had an interest in polypharmacy, and I've got from a public health point of view, I've got a big interest in how all of these exposures are impacting us, right? Because when you start to unpack how our lives have changed over the past 100 years, it's beyond just the food we eat. There's lots of exposures that have drastically changed.
Unrecognizable. If you think about our ancestors worrying about what the things that we do now, it'd be unrecognizable, wouldn't it? It's just mad when you think about it.
It is totally mad. When you start going down the rabbit hole, you're like, and so it's I think it's very important to remember that everything we consume, especially ingesting things directly, and don't get me started on like IV drips, right? You can imagine how I feel about those. Anything that you're doing that with has the potential to have a pharmacological risk effect on your body. And so the fact that we sort of pop pills and powders so freely, when, as I said, you know, we're basically the first. We had difficulty categorizing Daily 30, our product, because it's made with whole foods. And so the industry was like, well, but you're dosing it. And I was like, yes, because we need to get people to get this diversity of fibers in these 5 food groups and the 5 grams of fiber in each day. Like, but it's unusual to have a dietary supplement that's actually made of food, which is hilarious. Like, the clue's in the name. So they're called food supplements. They're regulated as food supplements, but they're very far away. The vast majority are very far away from being food supplements. So it's supposed to supplement a healthy diet, but the reality is a lot of people take these as a replacement for a healthy diet. I've worked with a lot of people who are so disengaged with food. Now, what you said there is super important, right? We don't have food education in our curriculum really anymore. Children are growing up not knowing how to boil an egg unless they grow up in a family that does it. So we are disempowering generations from, why I would argue, the most essential life skill for long-term health, which is cooking a healthy meal for yourself. Like, we're not providing this essential life skill set to our children. And of course, the way that like family pressures and structures are now, it's really hard to even have children grow up in a household where they'll witness cooking, right? And food industry, and again, like as I said, it's an industry. They've swooped in, and there are ready meals for children, for toddlers, for babies. There are pouches, there are pots. You don't have to cook. You don't even have to cook for your child if you don't want to. Now, will they be getting the optimal nutrition from these? No. But the front of pack marketing will make you believe that they are. So I'm angriest about this, because there are droves of parents who are purchasing products designed and marketed to children and babies and toddlers, with front of pack marketing, which has you believe that it is a complete meal.
And
it contains essential nutrients.
It's expensive.
Right?
People are spending their money on it. They're bought into it. They think they're doing the right thing.
Because it's hard to fathom that it would be allowed by our government to sell products aimed at babies that isn't actually helping them. Like, why do we do that? Good question. Another topic. But so, the BBC Panorama on this topic really showed how, especially families that have less access and that have lower education, they're the ones suffering the most, because they trust the supermarkets and the industry to be creating healthy products for their children. Right? And it's awful when you think about it, because to have an entire generation of children now who have been, some of them, weaned entirely on packaged foods. And I've worked with some of these parents, and they are, they're like, well, at least if it's in a pouch, they won't choke. I know that it's a puree. I'm worried about what to put in it. So by not educating people on how to cook basic healthy meals, we're not only robbing the person from being able to look after themselves, but we're also robbing their children and their grandchildren and their nieces and nephews and brothers and sisters, right? So that is a real problem. So you can own a vegetable peeler, but if you don't know what to do with it, and then of course if you can't buy the vegetables because you live in a food swamp, so there's lots of structural issues, and I think it's important to highlight them because we should all be very angry about them. But also, if you are someone who's fortunate to be in a position to say, well, actually, I can learn how to cook, spending money on a cooking course, there's actually very good free resources now as well on cooking, which is great, is a brilliant investment. We have to start thinking about eating healthily as an investment in ourselves, the same way we do for expensive gym memberships or cold plunges or saunas. I mean,
or even the supplements we're buying because we think we're investing in our health.
Yeah. Like, there's lots of things that we're happy to part our money with that have way less evidence. So reframing, like, cooking a healthy meal is the ultimate flex for health, for looking after yourself. And then if we do that, it will help people to feel empowered to do it for themselves, and to realize that, you can feel great when you change your diet, you start cooking for yourself. The transformation to how great you feel doesn't take decades, right? You'll see the impacts on your health outcomes decades later, sure, but you feel great straight away. And dozens of studies on how it can improve mental health outcomes, even with severe depression and more severe. There's loads of evidence. You're going to feel great if you just make a priority. But again, we're fighting against this narrative pushed mostly by the food and supplements industry. Actually, I've got some bones to pick with people where they're like, don't worry about thinking about your meal. Convenience is served to you in this bottle. Drink your meal at your desk. Please don't do that. Like, we've now commoditized like an essential human experience of sharing food with our loved ones and our colleagues and our tribe. We evolved over millennia to forage, hunt and gather, collect, return, prepare and share. That was their entire lives. for a long time. And then we'd paint about it on caves and write it. And now we're saying, don't spend any time doing any of that. Instead, drink your meal, have this shake or powder or bar, and don't worry about it. What? No way. Like that is rude. Like there's only people profiting from that are the company selling you the thing. There is, and unfortunately, it's huge. Do you remember Herbalife in the 90s? Maybe you're too young for that. Same thing.
No, no.
Herbalife was the same shit. Like, sorry, I just saw, but they literally sold you shakes and soups in little sachets, and no one feels better. No one is better with that. I think what's super important is to reclaim our food culture and reclaim food education and learning to cook for ourselves as a really essential basic thing that we need to do. And then you can start exploring where your food comes from, how it's grown, how healthy is the soil, is it seasonal? Once you start cooking and enjoying food again, all these things open up about flavor and provenance, and it is joy. It's a joy to do. It's a joyful thing. It's like happy, joyful thing to do. You get to explore lots of different ways of cooking and flavors and tastes, and we're wired to enjoy that stuff. So I think that's a big, a very important point that is often missed when we talk about optimizing nutrition. Optimizing nutrition also means reconnecting with the joy of food.
In terms of scientific studies and longevity, in terms of how long the study has been going on, eating whole foods, cooking them together and sharing them with people who we quite like their company. It's a pretty good study in terms of how long it's been going on, and the results are pretty conclusive. And yet we're more likely at times to swap in a supplement that we haven't even bothered to read the label of, the back of, what the ingredients are. Never mind look up the study, never mind whatever. We've just seen our favorite influencer selling it, and no shade on them, but we don't do our research.
No.
But in terms of a long-term study of eating food that actually grows, maybe even in the country we live in, like we've seen it actually grow. Like, imagine. There's a reason that fruit tastes so great when we're abroad, because it's often local, it's not flown over. And then the food that's grown in the country that we live in, maybe even in our garden, it tastes amazing as well. And it's not that we can't import or eat food that's imported, but it's kind of just getting to know that. And I just think it's just such a boring option, because it's not new, as you say. Like you've literally been saying it the whole time. It's simple. It's not this flashy, wonderful prescription of you are going to feel healthy and you can tell everyone how healthy you are because you have X, Y, and Z. It's a slow process. It's actually 3 times a day, and it will make us feel better.
Every day, right? You eat every day.
Yeah.
And so it's like consistency is king. So if you can just make the most of it most of the time, perfection is not the key, right? It's like just consistency. It's like, what do you eat most of the time? What's on your plate most of the time? And are your meals nutritious most of the time? And if the answer is yes, you'll notice it. You'll know the difference from a world where actually we're struggling to get healthy foods in, or we're heavily restricting, yo-yo dieting, restricting, and then eating foods that we feel are naughty. Like there's also this idea that like good and bad food has slightly ruined our relationship, and the way that food is often used as either a reward or there's a lot around that too, and punishment and excessive. So it is complicated in the sense that sometimes we carry beliefs, or we carry like emotional attachments to food from our childhood, and actually the first step is just awareness. It's like, actually, why am I eating this? How has this become? And so then as soon as you become aware of certain things, your attitude changes. And that goes for a lot of things. It goes for our relationship with alcohol. It goes for like how we understand our position in the world. Let's we go into that, down that path. But once you understand this, then you can start to think, oh, okay, so what I've done is I've heavily restricted my breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and now it's 9 p.m. and I'm starving, but I'm trying to lose weight because I've been told that that's what I need to do. But now I'm going to eat like half a tub of Ben & Jerry's because I'm starving. Mm-hmm. And as soon as you start to recognize the patterns, and you're like, actually, what if I just ate nutritious breakfast, lunch and dinner, then I might not be hungry at all come 9 p.m. Or if I fancy some Ben and Jerry's or ice cream, whatever brand, I just, I might have a bit, but I'm not going to eat half the tub because I'm actually not hungry and I just want a bit of taste. It changes the relationship. So that is also important to point out. It's like, how do we help nurture a better relationship? And cooking can often hold the key to that too. Learning how to cook a nutritious, delicious meal, interacting with the ingredients, going to a farmer's market, going to find like an interesting way to get all these things help to rebuild that relationship with food and its role in our lives. I think you're right. We need to understand that it plays a fundamental everyday role in supporting us and our health. It's there to help you. Food is there to be a power for good and for health. It's not something we need to be like cutting out, replacing and avoiding at all costs.
Yeah, it's all about the narrative. And why do we feel like we need to reward ourselves with something sugary and sweet? Like, why can't it be like a date and peanut butter or something like that? Or why can't it be, and it's not saying that having ice cream's bad, but it's just saying, actually, do I want to have something sweet? And is it needing to be sugar? Or it's a Friday night, I need to have alcohol. Like, do you want alcohol? Great. Or is it just a habit that you feel like you need to relax? So you're going to have it when you'd actually just rather have, a herbal tea or whatever floats your boat. Literally whatever. It's not these right or wrongs. It's that narrative. And I think that's so interesting. And I just love the saying of consistently good is better than occasionally great.
Yes.
You can have the best day ever and you can eat like an absolute queen and everything is colorful and it's amazing. But if you do that once a week, like what is the point? You're going to completely exhaust yourself. Whereas if you do it every day in a sustainable way and you still have the chocolate, the Ben and Jerry's, the alcohol, whatever it is, in moderation, it's probably long term going to look a lot better than having these spurts of either not eating anything because you think you're dieting or eating super, super healthily, which is great, but it's just not consistent, or you're not able to keep it up because it's so time consuming, because it is time consuming cooking, but it is that allocation of importance of what I guess you want to allocate to yourself. It's a prioritization.
It's the same with budget. So like, it's interesting. We used to spend about 25% of our disposable income on food, and now it's around 9%. So we've put a lot less value on food, which is interesting. And of course, this is still to say, like, some people can't afford to have a choice, and it's really important that we fix that in a country that has the GDP we have. No one should be going hungry. Like, what is going on? But it's also interesting to see how people just don't value it as much anymore. Say, oh, I don't really want to spend that money on my groceries. Like, I don't. So we have to give ourselves the grace of saying, actually, I want to spend 1 hour or 2 hours preparing and eating nourishing food for myself. Because guess what? It's time spent on yourself. So, people really are poor on time, but the average adult in the UK spends 2 hours and 41 minutes on Instagram. So and I know that's in bursts and it's different, but there has got to be some level of prioritization. And also, cooking healthily doesn't have to be time consuming. If you're making like some delicious complex recipe, yes, but you can make a very nutritious meal. I'm the queen of this because I actually don't love laborious cooking. I actually love pulling things together and making a meal in under 20 minutes. That's like that's where I sit, and or preparing quickly and then roasting slowly, right? That's where I am. So you can do that. It doesn't have to take a very long time. And the more you do it, the quicker you become at pulling these meals together. So I think it's reframing, reinvesting both time and money, and don't be frightened if the first time you do it feels quite like a lot of work. It gets easier and easier the more you get into it. And like snacks, right? You don't have to make your own homemade energy bliss balls. You can literally grab some mixed nuts and an apple and a piece of cheese, and that's a great snack. So
food that looks like food. Food that looks like food. That's what we want.
Yeah, or Michael Pollan, right? What did Michael Pollan say? Eat real food, mostly plants, not too much. I mean, he literally nailed it with that. It was a very good phrase.
It's just a reallocation of the time, the disposable time we do have. And it's fun to spend time on Instagram. And we are all contributing to this 2 hours and 41 minutes on average of the screen time. You know, we will all do it ourselves. But the most annoying thing that someone can say to you is, after you've been scrolling on Instagram for a while, say, okay, so what did you actually consume? Like, what do you remember any of it? Because I personally don't. And it's really difficult. And it doesn't mean that it's wrong, but we're probably going to really enjoy a lovely meal that we spend time cooking. And the first time you do a recipe, it's really overwhelming. But then the second time you do it, you kind of know what you're doing. And the more you do it, it's just that muscle that you're working. And yeah,
100%.
I think it's just that habit creation. And
It's a
again,
skill.
kind of boring, but very important. And I'm really fascinated in how you approach your research, because the fashion industry is working seasons in advance of, they're already launching all their spring summer looks already, and they'll be working so far in advance. In terms of the work that you do, the research that you do, what are the trends that are coming up? How do you predict them? Do you work in advance? Is there like a cycle that you can see coming? How does it kind of work?
It's interesting. I mean, that science takes a very long time, like especially trials and big analysis. So one of the papers we've been working on, which is due to be published imminently, we've been working on manuscripts of it for like 18 months. And before that, the study itself took like over a year. So science, this is the thing, it's like traditional science, academic science can move pretty slowly. And it can take a very long time from having the idea to running the study or doing the analysis to publishing it in a peer-reviewed journal. Like the shortest time is probably 9 months, literally. It's unheard of. Now, COVID changed that a little bit because we had preprint. So you can now like put it online before it's reviewed by peers. And so some journals will do that for very high impact studies. But generally speaking, it's months and months and often over a year. So we know what's coming in terms of like what we've done. So for example, the menopause microbiome data, like we published the first paper from that study in 2022, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's 3 years later and we're still analyzing and unpicking information from that study. So you see, it's like we know what's coming in terms of our research and the Zoe studies. But in terms of the wider things, well, there's so much going on. But we know, for example, gut microbiome science continues to evolve. We know there's a huge body of work happening in the States about personalized nutrition. So there's going to be lots of papers coming out that talk to how personalized nutrition is effective, what's effective about it, what's happening. And then there's trends in nutrition science, which I feel like we do a pretty good job at knowing what people are going to be interested in. So things like the role of inflammation, for example, in things like mental health conditions and how inflammatory markers and cytokines play a role in predicting chronic disease. So there's things that are emerging. Or protein is like, this year was all about protein intake, how much. And again, so we developed like a personalized protein stance so that it's across the life course. And what are your goals? And do you have existing conditions? It's not as straightforward as like, everyone needs more and more is great. And like, where does it come from? And as like the next step is actually seems to be less about protein amount and more what it comes from and what the amino acid balance is. And so all this stuff is super interesting. The inflammation is really interesting. The microbiome and menopause is really interesting. The amino acid balance is really interesting. Super great science. How we can manipulate microbiome compositions to help improve health. Great. The advice is the same across all of them. If you eat more plants, if you have a variety of plants in most of your diet, lots of healthy fats, omega-3 fatty acids, you will be already ahead of the science and optimizing your health. Then there's like, okay, so there's some emerging science which is newer, but things like fermented foods, right? Now, fermented foods have been traditionally a part of diets forever, but now the science is like, oh, how is it working? Well, it seems to really has a big role in managing inflammation and keeping it within its healthy boundaries. Amazing. So we're learning that about fermented foods. And we ran a big study of 10,000 people and said, eat 3 ferments a day. So let's see how you feel. It works. It helps. So there's new things that come up. which are exciting, and we can understand the mechanism behind them, which is really cool. But in terms of predicting, I don't know, like I don't know how it's more like you see it's bi-directional, right? It's kind of shaped by people's interests, shaped by advancements in the science, and by trying to find solutions that can help people engage with dietary advice that's going to help serve their health. So now if you're in the longevity space, you might, and you ask someone who's in that space or like a biohacking space, they might answer differently and say, well, there's some really exciting, research happening on NAD plus, and actually we need to get those levels up. And I'd say, yeah, sure. But like what we can see from the NAD trials is that it's the diet that influences NAD levels, and we can't really. So it's interesting, but medicine and medical science offers us and nutrition science, a huge wide variety of interventions, approaches, and it's just about, for us anyway, it's like, what are the ones that are going to move the needle the most? What are the things that are going to have biggest impact? And what are the things that people really relate to? So 30 plants a week came from one of our studies. And we didn't realize how much people would resonate with that as a message. It was just like, how do we get people to eat more fruit and veg and plants and seeds and nuts? Saying that doesn't work as well as saying, try to get to 30 plants a week. People love it.
I love
like,
a target. It's
target.
tangible.
And plants mean spices and herbs and nuts. It's great. So suddenly
that
you're
was
diversifying.
a good realization for everyone. We all like that.
Yeah, and you're diversifying away from like your cucumber, your lettuce, your tomato, and your banana, right? So it's like you're introducing new things. And so finding those sweet spots where people really feel excited it also drives how we communicate the science. Like, what are the things that people find useful? It's important. I think science for the sake of science doesn't really help move the needle. It needs to be science for the sake of improving public health, and that's what we try to do.
It's interesting how the process does take a while, and there are lots of hoops to jump through, and then you need to get it peer reviewed, because then that legitimizes a lot of the conversation and the results and the what the studies are actually saying. But then we're in this weird sort of online world where we want it right now. The trends are overnight, immediately things are in, things are out, proteins kind of out, fibers really in. But what do we know about this? Like, where's the period? Trying to keep up with this hamster wheel of these trends. And then I guess a lot of the companies are just going to be spilling all of this stuff out, which actually isn't peer reviewed, which actually hasn't got a long-term research of the results. And that's where a lot of the difficulties can arise from. But then, as you say, a lot of the studies are actually based on these fundamental points of diet. What are you doing consistently?
Yeah.
And these main foundations that are our health and
lifestyle medicine, right? I mean, it's literally, it works. And it does require consistency, and it requires engaging with it daily. But if you want to see big improvements and like fundamental goodness, you got to do those things. And then if you're already doing them, great, then let's have a conversation about how sauna is going to optimize, or let's have a conversation about whether urolithin A is like a supplement that's going to really change your athletic performance. Like, there are then the top 1%, the like 1% tweaks, but got to get the big foundational stuff first. Eat well, move daily, prioritize sleep, connect with people you like. Those things are going to deliver way more impact than whether you're taking this particular supplement on this day, or whether there's so many tweaks that you can then add on top. But we have to go back to the basics, because otherwise you do get cognitive overload and you just give it all up. I just can't, it's too much. And there's so many distractions in the modern world where, it's too much, I'll just watch a show, or I'll just sit on my phone, or there's so many distractions that we have to build like a bit of a barrier for ourselves to make sure we can focus on the real health promoting habits. Otherwise it will get washed, you'll get distracted, and it's not your fault. It's the way that the world at the moment has been built. And And we have to just remember to go back to the foundation sometimes. And the conventional wisdoms for good health, a lot of them are just being proven by science now. And so if something sounds trendy, faddy, and if just ask yourself, is it in the Mediterranean dietary pyramid? Is it there? Am I moving my body? And am I sleeping at night? Those are good places to start. If it's flying in the face of those conventional wisdoms, which are like scientifically sound, then it's probably not right. And if someone's trying to sell you a fear-based solution, I also would argue that that's not helpful, and I would question that.
I think you just hit it right, the nail on the head there with the 1%. They're all great, these things. Yeah. Like, they are fantastic, but there's the 99% that you kind of need to go through first. And you just described it as the conventional wisdoms, which the conventional wisdoms that have been done by all of our ancestors and generations before us. And they, eating whole foods and sleeping in some sort of like circadian rhythm that we're actually asleep when it's dark at some point during the day, and that we're not constantly overloading our brain, that we're actually looking people in the eye, we are smiling at them. It's all these really boring things, but it is that 99%. And then we can go into these snazzy research papers and actually learn about optimizing that 1%, because it's really fun and it's really great. And it, feeling like you can optimize your health, you do feel empowered by it, you can enjoy it, and buying these supplements, you do feel great. But I think there's a huge amount, it's like it's not a sticking plaster, it's the 1%, it's a cherry on the top, it's not the cement holding it together.
The cherry on the cake, right? But if there's no cake with no icing, then what are you putting the cherry on anyway?
Exactly. Oh, it's so true.
Yeah,
exactly.
So that's how I would think about it.
And to close, I just want to effectively summarize your work and this conversation, and just know, what is your ultimate goal in the nutrition industry? What are you aiming for? What is the outcome that you're trying to achieve in every step of the work that you take, every day that you go into it? What is the thing motivating you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really motivated by the change and the power of the change that I've seen in people I've worked with, or that I've heard when I interact with people who buy my book, or people who are Zoe members. Like, that motivates, because it's transformational. It is transformational when people can finally take agency of their health and like transform how they feel and their health, right, with the food they eat every day. So in terms of my work in, like, I'm a public health medical scientist by training, and nutrition is the tool that I feel can deliver transformational change for individuals and at population level. Is amazing, right? So what I hope is that reaching as many people with evidence-based, approachable, joyful, no nonsense advice and practical tools that they can actually implement. Like, if I can do that for, I mean, even just doing it for one person is amazing. But if we can do that at scale and really help people to re-engage with the power of food for good health, that I can't ask for more. Like, that is huge, and and the potential is so brilliant. And that's what I hope to do with what I do every day. And whether it's like teaching medical students or one-on-one work or podcasts like this, like, if people listen to this and they're like, oh wow, you know what, food is my friend and I want to reconnect with it and help me stay super healthy, then my job's done. Like, that's me, tick. That's what I hope to achieve.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Federica, thank you so much for this whole conversation. We've literally gone through so much, and there's a lot to take in, but there's also so many fundamentals that we can actually apply, which is what I love about these conversations. It's not just understanding the really complex stuff, which is so important and fascinating as well. Like, it's not the enemy, but there's actually the simple outcomes that we can apply to our lives that will lead to that consistency, that will help us feel healthier, that will not probably cost as much as all of these extras that we're spending our money on, because, you know, a bag of carrots you can buy for not very much and you can actually enjoy them with some hummus that you made yourself, imagine, you know, a
Yeah,
can of
really good.
chickpeas, something like that. So thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this.
Oh, good. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I hope that you have a lovely rest of your evening.
Thank you. And I'll link as well below, you know, all the links to your Bic and your Instagram and all of these resources at Zoe as well that, you know, people can follow, because it's, as you say, there's so much free research out there.
Yeah.
And then there's things that you can really read up about as well and really enjoy that process. So yeah, I'll make sure to link those below so people can check those out.
Brilliant. Thanks, Emily.